The title of our discussion today is Tourism, Conservation, and Inequality, the Case of Tanzania. For those of you who don't know, BYU has a relationship with universities in Tanzania where we take students every spring. And we're delighted today to be able to host some of our hosts as a university when our students go to Tanzania. To introduce our speakers today, I would like to invite Leslie Hadfield, Associate Professor of History and Director of Africana Studies, to introduce our distinguished guests.
Thank you, Quinn. This is a dream come true. Really, we planned to have this happen in 2020, and you all know what happened to those plans, so we are very excited to have these great people here with us. As Quinn said, in the past 5 years, BYU's Geography Department and Africana Studies has collaborated with scholars at the College of African Wildlife Management at Mweka in Tanzania. And this college was established in Tanzania in 1963, so right on the independence of Tanzania as a country. Well, it became Tanzania. And it's a pioneer institution in wildlife management training in Africa. It's really shaped the profession or professionalism in wildlife conservation and management throughout the continent. And I think it's safe to say, maybe this number has changed, but about 90% of the protected areas in Tanzania, particularly national parks, games reserves, and the Ngorongoro Conservation Area, are managed by graduates from the college. So pretty important institution in Tanzania and beyond Tanzania. And the college has graciously hosted BYU students participating in the Tanzania Kilimanjaro Study Abroad program from BYU, and professors from both institutions have collaborated on joint research projects and publications. For example, we have this book that came out, was it 2021? It was in the works for a long time. But a number of us have chapters in this book, Protected Areas in Northern Tanzania, Local Communities, Land Use Change, and Management Challenges. We also helped to establish a GIS and remote sensing lab on the college's campus. So we're really excited to have people from the College of African Wildlife Management with us today. The panelists today are all senior lecturers at the college with international expertise and educational backgrounds who've worked with BYU professors closely and students closely. We'll hear from each of them for about 7 to 10 minutes. They'll speak on the topic. We'll start on this end and go that way. So we'll start with Dr. Emmanuel Martin, who's a senior lecturer and the He's the acting deputy rector of the college, and he has expertise in wildlife management. He specializes in forest mammal ecology and modeling, and protected areas planning and management. I'm trying to keep this brief so that they can have more time to speak. So there's a lot more to what I'm saying, a lot more detail, but too much for me to outline for everyone. He's worked in different African countries and has conducted many collaborative projects in Tanzanian national parks with international groups, including utilizing GIS and remote sensing with Dr. Ryan Jensen and Dr. Perry Harden, who are here from the Geography Department at BYU. And so we're excited to hear from Dr. Martin. Afterwards, we'll hear from Dr. Kokel Melubo, with degrees in tourism, business, natural resources management, and geography and environmental studies. Dr. Melubo has research interests in tourism and community well-being, corporate social responsibility and tourism, and the work of guides and porters in the tourism industries, which he's working with me on, and I'm very grateful for his expertise there and his time and research. His current research works to detail Maasai indigenous knowledge as it relates to conservation and tourism, which is very important to him because it has a lot to do with his own home community. We'll hear from Elizabeth Kamili next. She has conducted research on protected area land management and is currently focused on conservation biology. She holds degrees in natural resource management and wildlife management and has worked as a wildlife officer for the Tanzanian National Parks Authority. She contributes to the college's many programs, including hosting international visitors like BYU students, and Also, I thought this was a fun fact, the United Kingdom's Prince William, when she demonstrated new anti-poaching technology to the prince. So, very exciting things. All right, so let me not take more time. We'll hear from, we'll start with Dr. Martin. Thank you.
Okay, this working? Yeah, it works. So thank you so much, Dr. Leslie. Good morning. Is it afternoon? Good afternoon, everybody. So, as pointed ahead by Dr. Leslie, my name is Dr. Emmanuel H Martin. I'm a senior lecturer at the college and also acting deputy rector responsible with administration and finance. So, first of all, this is a huge number, I would say. So, regarding the topic of today, I would like to focus my topics on the following issues, given the fact that talking from the perspective of inequality, it's all about an even and an equal distribution of opportunities and rewards regarding various issues related to conservation. So there are different classes of this. There's gender inequality, class inequality, and also, oh, is it not? Can you hear me now? Okay. Yeah, so there are various classes of inequalities. There could be many, but I've narrowed down to the following ones: class inequalities, gender inequalities, physical, racial inequalities. I'll be speaking specifically on the conservation perspectives. Given the fact that our college was the pioneering institutions to offer wildlife management in Africa, especially for English-speaking countries, due to the fact that by that time most of the African countries were getting their independence, and the colonialists by then were fearing that probably once they leave, maybe the wildlife will be in the wrong hands, putting it that way. So they had to establish our college, and the first recruitments were like 25 students from all over Africa who were studying wildlife management. Now, in terms of recruitment, I would say 99% of those who were recruited were males. And you can tell this from the way the way we act, like male-dominated kind of societies. So most of people who have been to at least elementary school by then were male. And eventually those who had the opportunities to attend the training were exactly the male ones. So you could see the way we started. That was issue number one in terms of recruitment in the academics. So most of them were males. And then later on, with the policy changes, with more opportunities opening up, then we saw a gradual changes of recruiting female students. I'm talking the gender perspectives. So as we speak, we started with like 25 students, from different countries. But as we speak, we have more than 800 students. With these, 60% are male students and 40% are female students. At least there are some changes, which is good. And this also reflected very well in the conservation organizations we have in terms of recruitment. First of all, we never had like female rangers, but now as we speak, we have at least 390 female rangers. So this is also a good change in terms of addressing these inequalities. But again, from academic perspectives, one of the activities or one of the functions the college does is research, consultants, and training. So from the college perspective, being an administrator, we've also tried to address these issues. Initially, we never had like female lecturers or instructors. But as we speak, we have a good number of female instructors. But the number is picking up. But to ensure that there is equal opportunities for our employees, we have tried to address this issue despite the low number of females we have. Like as we speak, we have 120 faculty members. Of these, 30 are female. But we made sure that at least some of these senior positions are given to female people. So for example, our key or our core departments, which is tourism and wealth management, are all led by female. In fact, Eliza is accompanying us, is our chief admission officer. So you can imagine, given the ratio of males and females in the academics. But again, in terms of racial inequalities, in terms of publication, collaborations, and these kind of things, we came to realize that initially most of the research were done by, I'll say, foreigners in the country. And we used to say that people from the Western have the technological know-how on how to do things. And we in Africa, we have the labs, the national parks, the game reserves, et cetera. So these people will come and do research. And much of the authorships will bear foreign names, right? So to address these issues, it becomes a policy. Whoever want to come and do research in Tanzania at least should collaborate with the local, just to address the issue. Because at the end of the day, the researchers who are accompanying the international researchers are also locals, who also have knowledge on wildlife and the routes and how to get through all these things. But when it comes to writings, all the credits goes to people who are coming from outside. So at least this one has also been taken care of. The good example is I can just give an example of the book we wrote, because that was a good approach. BYU had a good idea on how we can write the books, and we had all the collaborations coming from us, and even the authorship was one of the best. So this is also one of the ways to address these inequalities in terms of sharing expertise, etc. Professor Ryan and also Perry and my colleagues here have been involved in writing several books. One of the books has been mentioned by Leslie, and I'm sure another one is on the way to come up. So these are good examples of how we address, to try to balance out things and to ensure more collaborations. Another thing, when we attained our independence, the way our protected areas were established was more of a top-down approach. It's like the high authorities in the government would just sit and say, okay, let's make Serengeti a national park, let's make Selous Game Reserve as it is, etc. And in most cases, given the fact that these protected areas are not isolated, they are also part of the land use in Tanzania. And the people who are bearing the cost of conservation are the local communities. Imagine when the elephants get out of the park, they'll go and invade people's crops. So those people who live nearby are the ones who are suffering most. So they also need to realize these benefits. Now we had to change our policies by allowing what we call bottom-up approaches. And in most cases, it's not a requirement by the law that every protected area must have a general management plan. And one of the requirements is participation. So all the stakeholders must be involved to ensure that their needs are taken on board when it comes to the issue of conservations. And one of the products of this is now the Tanzania National Parks, for example, one of the agencies dealing with the conservation, have a system which is called Conservation Community Services, of which whatever is accrued through tourism, then some of it goes to the local communities, but in a different format. They would normally ask the locals, like, what kind of projects do you guys want? So it is them who decide, and then the Tanzania National Parks will fund the projects. In this way, it also brings what? Equality, in the sense that they'll build nice, healthy centers, which serves all people, regardless of their agenda. They'll build a classroom. Again, this is something good, which also all people, regardless of their agenda, will attend. And even the marginalized communities can have access to better education. So again, those are the things the government is doing. Another issue is representativeness in key positions. It is the government policy to ensure that by 2025, I'm not mistaken, at least even the members of parliament must be 50-50. And in this case, females are now encouraged to participate in political rallies. But even if they are not, regardless of whatever reasons, at least there are special seats dedicated to females, at least to bring that representative into the parliament. Probably to start with, this is what I can throw in, and then probably later on I can join back. Thank you so much.
Right. So this is Melubo, and I may start by asking you, do you know Tanzania? You do, right. What about Tanzania? What is known about it? Volcanoes. We have one active volcano for sure. Another thing interesting about Tanzania, how big is Tanzania compared to USA, the United States? Yeah. So a bit of Tanzania. We are a country of 59 million people, and you guys are 270 something million people. So you can see how big you are. But again, in terms of size, you are 10 times bigger than the country that we call home, Tanzania. We are a country that speaks Swahili, though there are 120 tribes within. So in addition to Swahili, each one of these communities speaks its own language. But Swahili tries to unify us together. And some of the words to do with Swahili, baba, mama, shikamo, mambo, jambo. Those of you who are likely to join us in Tanzania, you'll be quite familiar with baba, mambo, mama, kaka, dada. Dada means sister, and related. So, yeah. Come to Tanzania to learn the Swahili. It's the number 7 well-spoken language after English, of course, maybe Chinese somewhere, and others. Right. Tanzania is also blessed in terms of attractions. You may have heard of Kilimanjaro, the tallest mountain in Africa. It is housed in Tanzania. The Serengeti, where 1.5 million herbivores dominate the space, lives. Serengeti is within Tanzania. The Ngorongoro also is part. You have heard of Ngorongoro before? Have you? And I'm asking to those of us who have never been in Tanzania, possibly have no understanding of what Africa is. Or just say Africa is one big country. It is not. It's a continent of 55 countries. Big. You can see on the map there. Yeah? Please create time to learn about the country we call Tanzania and associated countries within Africa. So tourism. Tourism is a booming industry in the country. It attracts about, before COVID, it attracted 1.5 million visitors, and largely coming from the US and Europe. We have emerging markets, China and Russia. So come to meet each other in Tanzania. You come as an American, you meet a Russian in Tanzania, and beautiful. So Tanzania, tourism employs about 1.2 million people directly employed, but there's other more directly employed. The mamas who sells the souvenirs, the handcrafts, those who cooks around the vendors or streets, plenty of them. Those who sings but not attached with, or they do dances and stuff, but they not attached to the particular institutions. So tourism is doing pretty well, and it's an industry that it contributes 70% of the country GDP. 1.5 million is a big number to our case. I understand it's quite small compared to other countries, but of the population of visitors coming to Africa, we attract a good number, or we are on top 3 countries that receive a significant number of visitors coming to Africa. We are somewhere there. If I talk of tourism and inequality, inequality is existing, of course. One thing is about the stereotype. Africa, what is Africa? The understanding is not big to many, and especially the source market. They tend to put Africa as a problem continent, a problem where HIV is just plenty, malaria is there, and other sickness. No, it is not true. Africa is 55, has 55 countries, and they are safe. They are safe. So the fact that there's this thinking of Africa be a problem continent scares some people not to come to Africa. And I think we are here also to help you. You can see how good we are. So come to Africa, you'll still be quite safe, and you'll come back home safely. Leslie has been coming quite. We are doing researches together, and she feels pretty cool being in Tanzania. So the stereotype is there, and we are trying to help those of us who don't have a bigger picture of Africa to understand it. But again, it is the stereotype about what is tourism again, really. Tourism that is out there is defined from a Western version. It's a Western construct more, sort of. You have protected areas for whose? For the white? For those with dollars? Who are they? Is it for all of us, really? The tourism of Africa is there, I can assure you. But us is more of a social world. So meeting friends and relatives is much of the tourism that we do the most. But the statistics don't capture that much. What is captured is the tourism going to protected areas, Serengetis, the Ngorongoro, the Manyara, and others that I may not want to mention because, again, you say, he has mentioned so many and it seems we cannot even understand. So come to Tanzania, you will go to many protected areas, but you will also have an opportunity to meet people. So the tourism that we are trying to understand has to be twisted to accommodate the community, the social settings of places. I think it is important we have that. Even development itself, we define development from the Western version of it. So if I don't have a room of this kind, then I'm underdeveloped. I may be quite, you meet the community of Hadzabe and the Maasai people as well. I'm a Maasai. I come from a Maasai, born in Ngorongoro, and I grew up there. So I feel cool being there. And when there are no lights, there are no this and that, I'm still quite comfortable being and living my own life. We have to adjust and try to define development as well in a more contextual and allow the bottom-up versions of development also to exist, not what the United Nations defines and the others have just to celebrate or accommodate. Tourism has inequality when it comes to employment. A good number of those who works in the tourism industry are male, and especially the nature-based segment of tourism. You go to the protected areas, quite men, a lot, as Dr. Martin happened to say, that the mountain-related activities seems to be not of a male-female thing. the guiding or safari guiding, it seems not to be of a male as well, of a female as well. But progress are underway. I can assure you there's nothing that is not put in place when it comes to addressing these. Even when you visit the cultural bomas, the Maasai centers, where these are centers where you have Maasai community meeting visitors, so they're there to accommodate your interests and wishes of what Maasais are. They do some dances, they display this and that, they also sell handicrafts. Women have a role to play, and they're doing pretty much, but again, you can see men taking much of the share from the tourism industry. So, but again, tourism is, the inequality is also about, we are over-dependence of foreign tourists. So when COVID, for example, came in, it stopped all of visitors coming. I said America and Western Europe are the major source of markets. So when COVID was a problem, and I'm glad that is now ending, I wish it is closing, it's departing for good, we couldn't see you people. And we really dearly need UP in Tanzania. So glad that COVID is gone. Because the moment it was a problem, and it's not only COVID, Ebola was there, some other related, the tension between Russia and Ukraine now, what is happening with them. They all have a problem to do with, they all cause tourism too. Those of us who depend on tourism might find ourselves in trouble. Leakage is also a problem. We buy much from the West, from China. Our airlines, we don't have quite much of this. Yes. So there are plenty of challenges related to leakage, the porosity of economy, money, which is supposed to come to Tanzania, is not coming because of these package-related problems where the source market is there and the airlines are possibly from Europe, from America, and stuff. So those, if I may stop, because time is not accommodative. Thank you.
Jambo. Oh, I'm glad that you can respond. So I will take you back to wildlife conservation and inequality. So when we talk of wildlife conservation in Tanzania, we have a national framework which provide for the guidance on how to run or on how to do the wildlife conservation in Tanzania. And so that national framework is what is known as the wildlife policy of Tanzania. So in the wildlife policy of Tanzania, there are some issues that has to do with inequality that has been stipulated clearly. So I will take you through those. And the first one is the failure of the wildlife conservation as a form of land use to compete with other land uses. And that is when we think of wildlife conservation and we get to compare it, let's say, with agriculture or with mining, then relatively wildlife conservation do not contribute much economically to the national GDP as well as to the local livelihood. So that being the case, when other options present themselves, like let's say agriculture, people will be happy to opt for other land uses types other than letting the land for wildlife conservation. So that is very key, that the wildlife conservation as it is, it does not contribute much to the economic development at the national level as well as for the local livelihood. And the other form of inequality that has been stipulated in the wildlife policy of Tanzania is the inadequate wildlife user rights, and especially this is very true to the local communities. That when we talk of the wildlife resources, then the local communities do not have the access to those resources. And that is a kind of a serious problem, because we all know that the protected areas, the areas where the wildlife are, they're in the remote areas where they are neighboring the local communities out there. So it's the local communities who bears the cost of having the wildlife in the local setting. So if the local communities are not happy, what it means is then the problems that will jeopardize the well-being of the wildlife will increase. And so the government has noted that with the inadequate wildlife user right, the government has opted to establish the other unique form of protected area, which will take on board the needs and aspiration of the local communities, and that is what is known as the wildlife management areas. So in Tanzania, we have different versions of protected areas. We have the national parks, we have the game reserves, we have the game controlled areas, and now, just recently, the government has established the so-called wildlife management areas. So with the wildlife management areas, unlike the other categories of the protected area, is where now the local people are allowed to engage themselves in wildlife conservation, and at the end of the day, gain some economic benefit out of the wildlife conservation ventures. And apart from the inadequate wildlife user right, especially to the local communities, the other form of inequality that has been stipulated in the wildlife policy of Tanzania is the inadequate perspective of gender consideration in the wildlife conservation. So for many years, from time immemorial, we all know that there are some careers that has been considered as male domain. And this is so true for wildlife conservation. So out there, even in Tanzania and in most of African countries, I guess it's the same as well, in America and in Europe as well, that when we think of wildlife conservation, we feel like it's hectic kind of business, and the women cannot do that. So it's for the male who have to do that. So with the gender inequality in the conservation back home, it's a bit of problem, as there's an equal participation of women and men in wildlife conservation, and that in a way is a result of our traditional practices. For us in African communities, the ladies, the women, are responsible to take care of the family. They're not to be involved in those serious business and gain money. So with that kind of thinking, we find that some sectors like wildlife conservation, they are typically male-dominated. And the good thing is, in our country right now, we have a female president. So with that, things are changing. We see some changes in many sectors, and that include wildlife conservation as well. And the changes, we have started seeing the changes for the enrollment of the student in those wildlife-related programs. So back in the days, let's say maybe 20 years ago, then the ratio, the male-female ratio in the enrollment, it could be maybe 90:10, but right now it's more of the 60:40, with more women going into the conservation program, want to learn about the elephants and the rhinos, and they want to contribute to make the elephants and the rhino persist on the planet Earth. So that's one. For the enrollment, things have started to change. But if we get to now to the protected areas, we know that there are some people who are working there. The conservation rangers. Back in the days, the conservation rangers, if you just scan around, you could just see they were all males. But right now, there are quite relatively many females out there working as conservation rangers. And just to share with you this, it was just last year whereby the African award for the International African Award for the Conservation Ranger was given to a female, and it's our student. So it was a happy thing, yeah? So as you can see now, things are changing. Even the females, they have their contribution, and people get to recognize that, and they get awards. And not just that, then on the leadership position in the conservation sector, you find that now some of the leaders in the conservation sector are females as well. We have, for the tourism, for the past few years, we had a director who was a female, and even for most of the protected areas, we have the chief park wardens who are females. So as you can see, things are moving to the better side. So as far as the wildlife policy of Tanzania is concerned, those three aspects of inequality were highlighted, and the good thing is the government is putting in place some mechanism to address those mechanism to make sure that now wildlife conservation has relatively equal contribution to the economic development and to the local livelihood as for the other sectors as well. And for wildlife user right, as I mentioned, with the establishment of the wildlife management areas, now the local communities feel like they are part of wildlife conservation because they have wildlife protected within their village lands, and they get economic benefits out of the presence of the wildlife in their village land. And with the gender perspective, then the females are more engaged and participating in the wildlife conservation. Maybe for now, I'll just stop here.
All right. So we are now going to open up questions, and I think this is what we'll do. Excuse me. I'm just getting over a cold, and of course, as soon as I stand up, there's a cough that comes. So I don't know. I would like to give the panelists a chance to maybe comment on some things that the other panelists had said. Sometimes when we talk about panel discussions, we don't really hear the panelists discuss with each other. So we'll start with that, and then maybe we'll go to questions.
If each of you would like to take just maybe one or 2 minutes to reflect on anything you heard your other panelists say.
Yeah, sure. Maybe we'll just we'll take questions.
Yeah.
So then labda tu mbona tutaweza how much of the land is covered.
Okay.
Maybe.
Speak up.
Yeah, maybe a few things to just add on in terms of gender issues, because this was a key. Also, the Deputy Minister responsible for natural resources and tourism is also a female. So that's one thing also. It's very important we know that. But again, in terms of conservation, or in terms of the area which is dedicated for protected areas, Tanzania is among the 4 countries in the world that has dedicated much of its land for conservation. Like in Africa, I think it's Tanzania and Botswana that are at least 40% of our countries for conservation. So speaking of which, as Elizabeth has mentioned, the sector failed to compete with the rest of the sectors. And that being the case, there is high need to make sure that much is explored, to make sure that whatever is accrued, either through conservation or world-based sort of tourism, also goes back to the communities. As it stands, like I would say maybe employees are the ones who are like benefiting a lot, but yeah, there's a need also for locals who bear the cost of conservation also to benefit. I just wanted to highlight that one before we allow a room for questions and comments, etc., etc. Thank you.
If I may ask, is it good for someone to refer to herself as a feminist? As when we talk of inequality, does that make sense? If I say I'm a feminist, is it a good thing or a bad thing? Because I have a feeling like I am a feminist, but I'm scared to say it out because maybe it's not a good thing. Yeah? So, who knows Elizabeth Maruma Mrema? Have you ever heard of Elizabeth Maruma Mrema? So, you know, Elizabeth Maruma Mrema is the secretary of the United Nations CBD. You know, the CBD is the acronym for Convention on Biodiversity Conservation. So, and the good thing, she is not just a United Nations secretary for the CBD, but she is a Tanzanian as well. Yeah, so that's really good, and we're happy for her. So, for most of the females in the wildlife conservation, Elizabeth Maruma Mrema is our role model that we aspire to follow her step, to go and lead the world as far as biodiversity conservation is concerned. So that's what I just wanted to add.
Yeah, I have nothing to add this time. I invite you people to ask us questions. We'll be glad to do the justice to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your comments. We do have about 15 minutes for questions, so we will go until 1 p.m. I know that some of you may have courses you need to get to at 1, and you're welcome to slip out if you need to, but we have an opportunity for a rich discussion. When you do have a question on any of the topics that have been addressed, if you could just come over here to this wall and line up behind this mic. We're recording the discussion, and we would like to be able to hear the questions through the mic as you do that. Please, on any topic, feel free to come up to the mic. I'm just going to start with one question while we're waiting for questions to gather. And that is, you know, when I think about Tanzania's wildlife conservation programs, from the outside, it seems stunningly successful in many ways. As you mentioned, Botswana and Tanzania are relatively unique in the continent in their ability to preserve these marvelous natural resources. And I'm wondering if you could reflect for just a moment on what you are most excited about or most proud of in terms of Tanzania's conservation efforts, as well as something that you're very frustrated about. So when you worry for the future, what do you worry for? And in order to accommodate as many questions as we can, if we could limit responses of the panel to each question to just a few minutes.
So, thank you so much. That is a good question. And I think if I understood very well your question, what are we proud of and what are the main frustrations? So maybe I'll start with what we are proud of. Being the country where you still find wildlife in their natural environment, we call pristine land, is one thing which we are very proud of. And we feel that is our pride we take around. And also being the country whereby most of the conservationists have been trained in Tanzania. You go to Botswana, most of the top officials, they were trained in Tanzania. You go to Kenya, you go to Uganda, you go to Nigeria. So those are the things which we are very much proud of. And also, if you speak of the biggest destinations when it comes to wildlife based tourism, if you won't mention Serengeti, then you're missing something. So that one makes us proud. Yeah? You know, coming to a national park whereby you see millions of wildebeest, you may think this is like a fake story, but yeah, that's the truth. You go to Serengeti Plains, you see a lot of wildebeest. Sometimes you may think like maybe, houseflies sitting on something. So that's one thing. Or maybe bees on a beehive. Their frustration is that despite all these things, imagine 40% of the country is dedicated for protected areas. So how much are we getting out of that, given the piece of land that we've dedicated? For example, Selous Game Reserve, before it was split into a national park and a game reserve, had the size of 50,000 square kilometers. So, and that is a pristine land, just for conservation. So if you give someone with all the high techs to do agriculture, how much is he going to get out of 50,000 square kilometers? A lot of money. But that's the frustration. We feel like we conserve a lot, but what comes out of that is very, it's peanut. This is what I'm thinking. Maybe if I can also leave the microphones to my colleagues. Thanks.
Yes. For my case, conservation, the beauties of it, really. I spoke of the Serengeti and all the amazing protected areas that we have in the country. I think I'll speak of the frustrations. One is the fact that you don't know Tanzania. Many people don't know this country and how amazing Africa is. And the narrow picture that we say Africa is a country. So come to Tanzania, come to learn of Africa and the beauty of the country. But the other thing is tourism, conservation for whose benefit? Yes, we celebrate that much land, but our people also feel pretty happy of all these naturally endowed resources. The communities surrounding protected areas, I would love to see them more happier and proud of what God has blessed them with. So for me, those are the two frustrations that I have. Thank you.
For me, I think the biggest frustration is on the failure of wildlife conservation as a form of land use to compete with other land uses. It's more of what my colleagues have just said. Because if we have this big chunk of land just set aside for wildlife conservation and we don't get much of economic benefit out of it, then maybe later on people might think of converting those areas into mining fields, maybe into agriculture. And considering that the human population is increasing very fast and probably the wildlife conservation is no longer famous kind of thing in the Tanzanian perspective. Why? Because we don't gain much economically out of the wildlife conservation ventures. So that's a key frustration for me, because we want, maybe we need to think of the mechanism to tap more of the economic benefit out of the existence of wildlife and wildlife conservation in general.
Thank you, first of all, very much for your very interesting presentation and for coming all the way here to visit us. Appreciate that. My question is, how do you feel is the relationship concerning tourism and conservation with your bordering countries? And I'm thinking especially of the western border, where the volcanoes I'm interested in are. And so, the volcanoes, the wildlife don't really know if they're over a border or not. And how do you feel that relationship is?
Thank you so much. In terms of relationships, tourism versus conservation with our neighboring countries, first of all, I would like to highlight that Tanzania is bordered with several countries, and the ecosystem is also vast. There is what we call Serengeti ecosystem, which involves Ngorongoro Conservation Area Authority, Serengeti National Park, and Maasai Mara in Kenya. But we also have Mkomazi National Park, which is also bordering with Tsavo, West or Eastern Motor. Yeah. So all these, you talk about relationships. So there's what's called transboundary sort of a relationship between, because as you have highlighted, we as countries have political boundaries, but animals do not have. So in most cases, there's always a way of collaborations between the two countries. For example, I'll speak of our black rhinoceros, which is one of the wildlife resources which is almost at the brink of extinction, especially on the Tanzanian side. So we have had our black rhinos collared, and we could follow them through telemetry, like something we could follow them if they cross the border. So the moment we find that some of the animals have crossed the border, then we could alert our colleagues on the other side of the border to see that they will know this animal has crossed the border, and because given the resources we have, it's critical that it is looked after. That's one thing. When it comes to tourism, this is a bit also tricky because it's also about business. I'll speak a little bit about tourism, and then my colleagues maybe will add on in this. As we speak right now, most people have to go through the borders, either through Kia or as international immigrants get in, and they have to go to Serengeti, through Arusha and then to Serengeti. Alternatively, they could just cross from Maasai Mara and then through Tanzania. But this has some economic implications, like when we talk about too much of the leakages. Imagine in East Africa, literally it means Nairobi. So Nairobi is it used to be the capital city for the East African community before it broke. And of course, most of the development have been done in Nairobi. So imagine all the tourists coming from US to Europe, they first land in Nairobi. They will check in one of the hotels in Nairobi. And probably if they want to come to Serengeti through Maasai Mara, it means it's a day trip. So imagine a situation whereby someone who has arrived in Nairobi, spend all the money in Nairobi, wherever. So he just crossed to Serengeti with a packed lunch, just pay the conservation fees, let's say $60, and that you just do a day trip and then go back to Kenya with all the money for accommodation etc. being spent elsewhere. So somehow this way the leakages is, as my colleague has mentioned. So somehow I think there are some measurements in place to how to solve this problem. Maybe having a common tourist visa across the East African country, I don't know. But that's something which is being discussed with the high authorities to see how much are we going to deal with. But otherwise, in terms of anti-poaching activities, yes, we have bilateral agreements on how to share data and information in order to deal with the poaching activities, one of the many challenges affecting the conservation sector in Tanzania. So in a nutshell, this is what I would say about this. Maybe my colleagues, if they have anything to add on.
Yes. Our neighbors, the good thing is Tanzania is a member to East Africa Community. Is it East Africa Community what? Whatever. East Africa Community. It's bringing these 6, there are now 7. Is 7?
Yes.
Congo DRC has just joined the East Africa member group. So that's pretty cool. And this is good for business and as well for conservation. Imagine, for example, the wild beasts that we keep talking about. They move. They are always on the move. This particular time of the year, there are a big percent of them on the Tanzanian western part of the Serengeti. Around June, July, they'll be heading toward north. if they cross the river to Maasai Mara, and if there's no misunderstanding between the two countries, if there wasn't, then they may not be quite pretty safe. So at least being a member to East Africa and being a member to these neighboring states, you can easily talk to each other and say, the animals have come to your side, take care of them. They'll come and give birth to our country. In Tanzania, they do just a short visit too. So that's pretty a way to protect the animals as well. But in terms of business, a big number of visitors fly to East Africa, go first to Kenya, as Dr. Martin has mentioned. And it could be quite easy from them going to Maasai Mara and then to Serengeti. But I think we have been also tricky, a bit smart. We say, no, you guys, when you land, do your business in Maasai Mara, and if you want to come to Tanzania, come through Namanga border, go to Tarangire, to Arusha, through Tarangire through Arusha. We will still benefit from you, instead of a quick visit and back to Kenya. So that has made us pretty safe as well, and in terms of business, we are doing pretty well. And this is, we must mention what our former first president, Nyerere, you may have heard of that gentleman. He was a brainy fellow, said, no, let's close the border, and especially to this side, because these guys might trick us and take the entire share of what is supposed to come to us. Thank you.
Just to add, probably you have heard of the business tug of war about Kilimanjaro, because our neighbors are saying Kilimanjaro is in Kenya, but we are here to confirm to you that Kilimanjaro is in Tanzania.
Absolutely, and you can't, as she said, you might have a picture of Kilimanjaro on your Kenyan side, but there's no way you can access Kilimanjaro through Kenya. You have got to come to Tanzania and climb it. So.
Hi, my name is Carly Peterson. I'm a psychology major here at BYU. And just one quick question. All three of you spoke to kind of the gender inequality that is seen in wildlife conservation and how that gender inequality has been reduced a bit in the past few years. And you spoke to the presence of role models in the wildlife conservation field, as well as the fact of a female president. And I was curious as to whether you thought that the presence of these role models in leadership were maybe a cause of the decrease in gender inequality in wildlife conservation, or if there were other factors that were at play.
Maybe I'll be the first one to respond, and then my colleagues will respond to that. First of all, there are issues which are already no longer an issue. For example, the issue of elementary school. In Tanzania, elementary school is open to everybody, whether you are a male or a female. And then what comes after is how much effort you put on yourself. Like the role models we are talking about are kind of people who really excel well in the academics. And if you work hard, then you know what is the outcome. So the role models we're talking of, yes, they had a chance and then they utilize it fully. But again, it also has to do with which community are you coming from. Still, there are some local communities still don't think females should be allowed to excel much better. And also the issue of poverty as well. We have had there are some communities of which if a female student passed maybe elementary school and supposed to go for second school, and maybe the parent would want, is it dowry? Mm-hmm. He will opt for her daughter to get married in lieu of going for further studies. So it also depends on which route she followed. So this was another thing. But speaking of which, right now, those things are being well taken care of. The regional commissioner, the district commissioners are really working on this to ensure that if a parent has a kid who has passed examination, especially female ones, and didn't attend school, the parent will be held responsible. normally will be taken to the court of law, and it depends on which fine or penalty is going to be given out. So I would say both. First of all, cultural, if she came through a culture, a society which is well exposed, and then it's easier for them to go through. But now things also have changed. So the government also has to impose some strict measures to ensure that education is available. It's an equal opportunity to everyone. Yeah, thank you.
All right, gender. Okay, that's a very important aspect to my heart. I am, as a person, doing the needful to. So I come from the Maasai community, where women are highly underrepresented in many aspects, in leaderships, they quite much. So I'm one of those who are, when it comes to seeing women taking part in, you don't see quite a lot of them. So as a person, I've been trying to support girls to school. I believe education empowers. And we have a center that we bring up these Maasai girls who have just done with class 7 to stay for a year, and the next year they joined secondary school with an orientation of, the urban world, which is quite not much in the. So education for me, and I'm not one of only, there are a couple of institutions that are trying their best to empower female through education. And for sure, we have started seeing a good number of ladies taking up in the political system, in other expertise, nursing, being teachers themselves, and stuff. So, good news. But again, the political system of our country is trying its best to boost up women involvement in leadership. We have a 50-50 idea of having in the leadership. For example, when you go to the parliament, they have a wish, not yet attained, but the wish is by a particular time of the year, or some years to come, we'll have 50-50 men percent and 50 lady, which is pretty well. And that goes as well down to other political leadership, even institutions. You now, for example, when you compete, if they see my CV and Elisa CV, and Elisa seems to be more or less of the same with me, much consideration are likely going to be on her. She'll get a job, and Melubo will be hanging, looking for, so being a man now becomes another problem. Anyhow, so there are some efforts here and there try to bring up women in the system and be equal to men. Thank you.
All right. Please join me in thanking Elizabeth Kamili, Kokel Melubo, and Emmanuel Martin for